Hi class, this week we began looking at the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. We'll be looking at his book, A Groundwork for a Metaphysic of Morals. Kant is a 17th century German philosopher, systematic philosopher, well known for both his metaphysics and his ethics. Kant's moral philosophy begins with his insistence that there's only one thing in the universe that is good without qualification, and that is the good will. And his entire philosophy is built upon this claim. So what he's saying is that willing rightly is the only thing that is unconditionally good. Everything else, anything else you can think of that may be good, it needs something added to it to ensure its goodness. Namely, it needs to be possessed by a good will. So, for instance, money. Money is good, right, but not in the hands of someone who is evil. Money needs a qualification. It needs to be possessed by someone who has a good will. And in the hands of someone with a good will, then money can be good. Now, whenever you and I will, every time there's an act of the will, Kant says, there is a maxim. A maxim is the rule that you and I apply when we will. So every time we act, every time we make a choice, we will something, and that occurs in a maxim, in a rule. Now, a maxim consists of several parts. On the one hand, it is the act that we're willing, and we always act for a reason. We always have some motive. And then the circumstance in which this act occurs. So every time that we make a choice, act, every time we will, we're essentially saying, I'm going to perform this particular act in these circumstances for this reason. Every time we act, we're applying a personal rule, a maxim. Now, of course, this happens very, very fast. I mean, we're making choices constantly, and so it's hard to be overtly aware of the maxims that we're applying. It's easier to think about them if we look at them retrospectively. So after we have acted, we sort of turn around and think about, well, why did we do that? What was our rationale for that action? And when we do that, when we turn around and look at some act that we have just performed, and we ask ourselves, okay, why did I do that? And what we'll get is the max. For example, right, you're acting right now, you're willing, you're watching this slideshow. Well, why? Why are you watching it? Well, it's because you're applying a particular maxim. Something like this. I will watch the assigned class content in the week it's assigned in order to do well in the class. So we have an act, watching the class content, circumstance, the week it's assigned, and a motive or a reason in order to do well in the class. And so that's the maxim that you're applying as you sit here and watch this slideshow. Now, again, our actions occur very quickly, and so sometimes it's hard to get a handle on the maxim until after the fact when we turn around and ask ourselves, why did I do that? And the answer is going to be our maxim. So the point here is that every time you and I act, we're applying a rule that we have given ourselves. So our choices are always rule governed. We are rule-making beings. Let's think about the goodwill again. The only thing good without qualification is a goodwill. So willing rightly, on Kant's view, is the only thing good without qualification. It needs nothing added to it to ensure its goodness. So, since willing always occurs in a maxim, adopting the right maxim is the only thing good without qualification. Right? Do you follow that reasoning? If the only thing good without qualification is a good will, and willing always occurs in a maxim, then adopting the right maxim is the only thing good without qualification. But now the question is, okay, well, what's the right maxim? What does it mean to adopt the right maxim? Now, let's make a distinction between different kinds of maxims. Most of the time, when you and I act, when you and I formulate a maxim, we're doing so in order to accomplish something, to to bring about some state of affairs in the world. Let's go back to my example from before. Here you are sitting watching this slideshow, and the maxim that you've given yourself is, I will watch the assigned class content the week it's assigned in order to do well in the class. And so the maxim is based upon your attempt to accomplish something, to bring something about in the world. In other words, the maxim has a particular consequence at which it's aimed. Maxims that are formulated in order to accomplish something, let's call those material maxims. Maxims that are intended to bring about a particular consequence, let's call them material maxims. But Kant tells us that the good will is not good based upon what it accomplishes. That's not where its goodness rests. In fact, he tells us that we can imagine a will that, for whatever reason, cannot accomplish anything, and if it's willing rightly, then it's still just as good. He says something to the effect that, its efficacy, its usefulness can't add to its goodness. Neither can its uselessness take away from its goodness. So a material maxim is not the appropriate maxim for a good will. But what is the appropriate maxim for a good will? What sort of maxim is left if we take away the motivation to actually accomplish something? Right? What sort of rule can I give myself if not a rule designed to bring about some state of affairs, to have some particular consequence? Kant says that the only thing left after we've taken away the attempt to bring about some consequence, the only thing left is, as he says, conformity of actions to universal law as such. That's on page 70 in the groundwork. In other words, the good will lives by this maxim: I will only perform acts that can also serve as universal laws for all rational beings, because such is my duty, because it's the right thing to do. So Kant believes that the only maxim that's left for the good will is this maxim. Let's call this maxim the formal maxim. The formal maxim says, I will only perform acts that can also serve as universal laws for all rational beings, because such is my duty. And Kant believes that this is the only maxim left when we take away the attempt to bring about states of affairs in the world, the attempt to bring about consequences. It's formal because it doesn't tell me what to do. It says I will only act on maxims that can serve as universal laws, but it doesn't tell me what those are. So it still needs content. It lacks a practical matter as to what to do specifically. Well, that's still going to come from our material maxims. So the formal maxim is sort of like a super maxim. Every time you want to act, you begin to formulate a material maxim. You're trying to bring about some state of affair in the world. You're trying to accomplish something. You have to screen that maxim through the formal maxim in order to be a good will. So let's think about watching the slideshow again. I will watch the assigned class content of the week in order to do well in the class. So there's your material maxim. The question is, can I adopt that maxim? Is this an appropriate maxim for the good will? Well, the good will is living by the formal maxim. And so the formal maxim stands above the material maxim. And so what you have to do is you have to screen your material maxim through the formal maxim. And you ask, okay, well, could my material maxim that I will watch the class content, could that serve as a universal law for everyone else at the same time it is a maxim for me? So that's how this works. So you take your material maxims as normal, but if you're living as a good will, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that every maxim that you adopt could also serve as a universal law for everyone else. Could everyone else do exactly what I'm doing? Could everyone say, I will watch the assigned class content? And sometimes the answer is going to be no. Sometimes we're going to have maxims that it won't work for me to live by the maxim if it were at the same time a law for everyone else. And there are a number of ways that we can think about this, but really what Kant is demanding is that we live as role models, that we always live in a way that everyone else could stop what they're doing, turn and look at us, and do exactly as we're doing.